How's it going, guys? And welcome back to a sit down with somebody in the community that we all dig. Today, I've got TJ Schwarz on the panel, and we're in his shop right now. TJ is just an amazing guy. You guys have heard about him on the channel here. You guys have seen him in the knife world for a long time. He's been designing for 13 years. He's been making for 10. He started in a garage. Now we're in this big old shop out in New Plymouth, Idaho. You might know him from his Overland series, which is absolutely incredible, or even like the CRKT Scribe, which is a design that he has with CRKT. And I think that TJ makes some of the raddest fixed blades out there. It's no secret. We've talked about it before. And TJ, welcome, dude.
Thank you very much. Welcome to you.
Yeah.
Yep,
It's
welcome back.
Always fun to come out, dude. Always
yeah.
fun to come out. Yeah. It was a little hairy with the weather, but we're here.
Yeah, this morning I was looking out the window and I walked outside and it was just a sheet of ice. So I texted you. I was like, hope we get to film today.
Yeah. Well, luckily I was only about 40 minutes away. I live about 10 hours away, I think. But I was only 40 minutes away because I drove through the night and I slept in a Flying J parking lot. So.
I told my wife that's exactly what I expected. He's probably like down the road, so I think we're good.
Exactly. It was like 25 last night. I had my bag. We were good.
Sweet. Nice.
So, I mean, as you know, because I hit you up, right? We're looking at 5 knives, right? And for you guys watching who watched the one with Ben, if you haven't, go check that one out. We are going to grab burger and fries. It wasn't conducive with our layout right now. I don't know exactly how we would do with the eating, but if you hold on till the end, I'm going to actually show you a really interesting place to grab some burger and fries, and me and TJ will give it a rating. So that's at the very end.
Let's do it.
So yeah, as far as 5 knives go, we basically want to just take a look at some of your knife history and some stories around it. So let's kick it off, man. First knife, and like whatever that means to you, right?
First knife I ever had that I recall, pretty young. It's not this exact knife, but I think you'll recognize this. So classic Swiss Army. I think the one that I probably originally had was like a Wegner, which is, one and the same in some ways.
Swiss Army, not Swiss Army.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Swiss Army owns it now. We were kind of looking at that. Yeah.
That's right. So still, I've had multiple people ask me what my favorite knife design of all time is, and they're expecting something artistic and wild and like something that maybe a lot of people haven't heard of. And I'm like, no, I think this is my favorite knife design of all time. It's just the classics. I'm a Jeep guy and I like the simple, timeless things that don't change, things that are stable, things that they get right the first time and that they just hang around. And that's what that knife represents. So I still have one today. I always will. And that's the first knife I remember having for myself.
Dude, and that's exactly it. Like I completely agree with the Swiss Army multi-tool design, right? I mean, they've been making them since like late 19th century, and they're basically unchanged, right? Which tells you like either they're stuck in the past, but we know that they're a super successful company, so they're obviously making something that's useful and people want. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I still carry it. I legit do still carry a Swiss Army knife pretty frequently.
I was gonna say, is it like daily? Is it like a 5th pocket carry?
No, like it's the main knife. Not all the time, but sometimes. Yeah.
That's awesome. Dude, I've said it before. Like honestly, like if we boil down, I mean, we're knife guys, right? Like you make knives, right? Like obviously, I love carrying different knives and everything. But if we boil it down to what your needs really are for most people, most days, most people just need a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of just the facts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that's just a testament to that knife, because to have anything technology-wise, and knife is sort of a technology, but have 130 years of history or whatever it might be, and it still fits the needs of humans today, that's just rare. And so that's why I like it. Yeah.
I do wish, I'm a big fan of the Victorinox Compact. And I wish they would replace that parcel hook, though, because we don't have parcels anymore.
Yeah.
Replace the parcel hook with a Phillips screwdriver. You heard me, Victorinox. Yeah. Do it. I promise. I'll buy one. They'll sell one at least.
Yeah, right. Yeah, 2. Make it 2.
Yeah, there we go, 2. Yeah. So with your first knife, I mean, what was the story? Like, did you get it at a county fair? Did your dad buy it? How did you come about having this magic thing in your possession?
Yeah, I really think it came down to me like chomping at the bit and my parents having to make the judgment call like a lot of parents do when I'm, at that maturity level. And so I remember looking at them. That was always where I'd gravitate to if I was looking through a gas station or something. We all know those days.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of
and
course.
like the jar. I remember they'll have a jar of like these knockoff knives that are like $4.99 a piece.
Yeah, it's like a
pile.
2-stack. Like you have a blade, a flathead screwdriver, bottle opener, and maybe a corkscrew or something in the back end.
They'll have like your scratch-off tickets and then this jar of knives with a little sticker. And I just would stare at those when my parents are checking out and just think, man, I want me a knife. And eventually, I don't remember. I'd have to ask my dad what the moment was, but eventually, I got myself. I think I was at a store like that, and I was asking, "Can I please have one?" And finally, they said yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably got into trouble with it, and then had to have it taken away and then got it back later. So we won't talk about that. But
Well, when I sat down with Ben and talked to him, what his dad did is he had like this cabinet, and he basically was like a library. So he'd have to put his knife in the cabinet, and then right when they went camping or if Ben wanted to use it, he basically had to okay it with his dad. And I was like, dude, that's actually a great way to introduce kids to knives because then you're really like focused on when they're using it and how they're using it, or at least you're aware that they have it and they're doing something.
A controlled environment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know with my little one, when I gave her first knife, I think she was 4 or 5, probably 5. I think she was 5. The first thing we did is I was like, okay, cool. It was like a little like lock back buck knife, right? And I made a lanyard for it because, right, like you lose all your first knives, right? Like you don't have your first Wegner, right? Like, and we went out back and we carved soap. And that's how I taught her, because it's soft and the knife was mad sharp. And that's how I taught her, like, this is how you control a knife. Don't ever cut towards yourself, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think she's ever, with a pocket knife, I don't think she's ever cut herself badly. A little bit, but not badly.
You got to start them young.
Yeah, you got to start them young. Yeah. I mean, you got little ones. Like, are they at the age? Are they approaching an age? I don't know exactly how old they are.
2 and 4.
Oh, okay, so not quite.
They're getting towards it. They are playing with. My wife got them like kitchen knives that are plastic serrated.
Okay. Yeah.
So it'll cut like olives and stuff.
Cool.
So we have a time lapse of my daughter. She's sitting there cutting every olive in half in the whole can, and in the time lapse, you can just see her rolling through.
Yeah.
So they're getting exposed to it. Yeah.
That's cool. Cool. I mean, when your dad's a knife maker, right? Like you're gonna be
saddle maker, but
or no, you're their dad.
I see. I see. Yeah. My dad did make some knives, actually.
Cool. Oh, did he?
Way back.
That's way cool.
Yeah.
Was it like was he trying to sell them or just for himself?
Like Boy Scout level stuff, like putting antler handles on like existing blades and stuff. So he still has a couple knives that he made way back. So.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So I mean, right, like you come from a background of makers, right? Like your dad's a saddle maker. Like that's not just a skill, that's a craft, And I mean, do you remember which knife it was that kind of inspired you where you're like, I think I want to make knives? Because obviously there's like having the utility of it, right? Like, but then,
Yeah, so I mean, I was always interested in knives. It didn't attract me as a career until the Koenig knife story. So my friend Bill Koenig brought me in and he wanted me to, in the beginning, sketch or draw a knife. And then eventually I started working in CAD. It was actually about the same time in engineering school. So I started engineering CAD models to design knives, and it was kind of an interesting thing because I was pretty blind to like the high-end knife market at the time. Yeah. So I was designing with not a lot of information, so I was just absorbing fast and learning from him because he was into it way before I was on that higher level. And so it was those days when I realized like, oh, knives are a career. You know what I mean? Like this is a real thing. And I was in Boise going to school, and it kind of popped up around me. I realized like, wow, the more I learn, the more I realize I'm in the right place to be doing knife things. And so we're still near there, and it's the knife town. I feel like knife town USA in some ways.
Yeah, for real.
So
yeah. I mean, I think Boise goes unnoticed a lot for how much knife activity is actually in this area. Because obviously you have like the Portland area where there's a lot of big boys, right? But I mean, like, you have, to name the big one, right? Chris Reeve is basically right there in Boise, right? Yeah, I think that's really cool. So do you remember what age you were with that first knife?
Oh shoot, that's gonna be a tough one.
Because this is always the question, right? Is like, when's the appropriate age, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's a great question. My parents might remember better than I, so maybe I'll comment on this video. But it was, it was young. I mean, it was in that same range, like 5 or 6 years old. I don't remember. Yeah. But fuzzy memories of that. But
of course. Of course.
Good times. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's absolutely great.
I'll tell you a quick side story. My dad has the most interesting scar. He has about a Swiss Army knife blade width scar on the inside of his arm and the outside. Okay. Because he has a story when he was a kid that he was whittling a branch in a tree, and
perfect.
Yeah, fell out of the tree and stabbed it all the way through his arm. And so he still has the scar of I believe it was something similar to a Swiss Army. So he's got boom, boom, both sides of the arm.
Entry and
perfect
exit.
In and out. About ½ inch wide. Yeah.
That's wild.
But so I don't know how old he was, but maybe a little too young.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I've heard a lot of knife cut stories, but I have never heard of a full impalement. Yeah, that's wild.
Yep.
That's really cool. I mean, what about you? Like, did you have any like really gnarly? It's funny because until I got into nicer knives, right? I cut my hands a lot, right, as a kid especially, right? But my first cut that I was like, oh, that's bad, was actually a Yojimbo, was a Spyderco Yojimbo.
Oh yeah.
And so that was after I'd gotten into knives and everything. But do you remember, like, as a kid, were there any instances? Obviously, you didn't fall off a tree and stick a knife through your arm, but
Big cuts. No, I got hurt a lot. I was always falling down and hitting stuff and running things over and crashing. But no, I don't think I've ever had like the big knife cut. So knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood, right? Yeah. And there's definitely a familiarity that comes with, like, when you're working in it, right? Like, obviously you're making it, right? I handle a bunch of knives to show people on YouTube, and there's a familiarity that comes that it's a second nature, right? Like sometimes I'm handling knives and I see people like wince, right? And it's like, it looks dangerous, but like once you know the knife better, you're like, oh yeah, I know how to handle it.
Yeah,
right?
just know which end's pointy and which end's not, and it's a little more complicated than that. Like I said, there's a touch, but at the end of the day, that's it. Yeah.
I remember I was, man, this is only like maybe 7-8 years ago. I had a buddy, and he was telling me, he's like, yeah, if he was cleaning a knife off, and he was running along the blade this way, right? And I was worried. I was like, dude, you're gonna catch your hand or whatever. Just the way my brain was thinking. And he's like, no, dude, if you're pulling like from the top of the spine down, he's like, it's basically impossible to cut your hand. And I was like, oh, so now that's how I always clean my knives now.
Yep,
exactly.
Yeah, when we pull knives like out of the tumbler and stuff, we're over there oiling them. It's that same thing, and that's one of those things where if you just come at a little bit of an angle, boom, you cut yourself.
Yeah, you're sliced.
Yeah, so it's like perpendicular to the edge, and you can wipe oil on the blade or whatever. But as soon as you pull towards the tip, you can lay yourself wide open.
Well, and I mean, like, especially you guys, right? Like, I mean, your knives come laser sharp, dude. Like, I don't know how, like, there's a lot of sharp knives in the world, right? Like, I mean, most knife companies, you're gonna get a knife and it's gonna be a really sharp knife. But like, especially, maybe it's because you make so many big fixed blades. And when I pull a big fixed blade out and it like can split a hair basically, and I'm like, this is scary, you know, because it's got weight and it's like takes up space, and you're like, this is a scary knife. Well, so you guys always do a stellar job with that.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, we take quite a bit of pride in the sharpness. It's, you know, it makes the knife. So the way we do it is a little slow. Yeah. But you know,
dude, but worth it.
We like it.
Yeah, so. I mean, well, talking about slow too, you guys, you have a mantra, like with your, how you produce things and how you think about things. What's your mantra?
The process is the product.
That's right.
So yeah. I went on a break from saying it, and it's now boiling up again. So,
so why did you? Because you were just tired of hearing it, or what was why
from
the break?
Saying it? Because Lucas Burnley and I, we have a little podcast together, and I'm always saying that. He picks up on it some. And I took a break from it because I was like, I might be like pounding the airwaves a little too much, but it's a truism for me, and I think it applies to a lot of things and a lot of people. So that's kind of what we operate by.
No, I love that, absolutely. And just for everybody out there, what is the name of the podcast?
Edge and Flow podcast.
Edge and Flow,
Spotify, Apple, whatever.
Yeah, it's similar to this, guys. It's long form conversation. But basically from two great minds that make knives, and they just get together, and it's just a ton of back and forth. And so I've tuned in and listened to a handful of episodes, and they're just, it's so insightful to get that type of in-depth from makers, right? And from like big small makers, right? Like like you guys aren't producing 1 million knives a year, right? But you guys make knives, you know?
Right.
And so it's really enjoyable. So if you guys want to get really nerdy about like the knife making process, and the process is the product, right? I say it right?
Yep.
Definitely check that out.
Yep.
Oh, that's great, man. Okay, so big knives, right? That brings us to our next category, and this is a category that I love, and that's apocalypse knives, right? Like if one knife to just take on the world, right? Like what knife have you chosen for this?
So I chose two because it depends on the type of apocalypse.
Oh, I like this.
If you're an apocalypse aficionado, you have to think about it a little bit, right? Because it's like, is it the kind where you're one of the only people left on Earth? Or is it one of the kind where it's like zombies, you know?
Right.
There's a little bit of a question there. What's the threat, right?
Okay, yeah.
So there's this knife, if you can call it a knife.
Which I think that's going on that's borderlining machete, but a bladed tool, bladed tool, right?
It's a Roman gladius. No, it's a it's a CRKT knife. It's designed by none other than Ken Onion.
Oh, okay.
Let me remember what it's called. It's the Chance in Hell. One word.
I do remember that. I do remember that knife. Yeah. Okay. The Chance in Hell.
Yeah. This is the chance. So for an apocalypse, you want a chance in hell, right?
Yeah.
So this sits under my Jeep seat.
Okay.
And it's largely, I use it for clearing brush to avoid pinstriping if I can.
You know. So this was the inspiration for, or not the knife, but the application was the inspiration for a knife that you've designed.
Yeah, which is the other knife. But if, you know, depending on what the thread is, this thing could probably do a number if you're like in The Walking Dead or something. You
Okay.
know, I can totally see it.
Yeah.
But I really like this thing. I love the ergonomics. Ken Onion is Ken Onion, so
of course.
it's beautiful. And then one of ours here, so the LT5. That knife was an inspiration to me in the genesis of like conceiving this knife, because the thing about knives about this size as a 5-inch blade is that a lot of them are really heavy and you can't get like any kind of speed with them.
Yep.
And so it's like if you're trying to whip through like willow branches or like sagebrush, it's so much weight that you can't get the velocity.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And then the branch ends up bending,
Yeah.
right? And instead of breaking, because like willow, right? It's really malleable. Yeah.
And there's merit to like a really thick knife. If its only job is, let's say, batoning, and that's all you ever are gonna do, yeah, thickness helps. But I wanted like a batoning fixed blade that has the ability to move a little quicker for that application. So this also lives under my seat, and this is once again the LT5. Now this is a little less, I don't know, zombie tool.
Yeah.
So it depends on the type of apocalypse.
Okay.
But,
Okay. I love it.
But if I'm like the last human on Earth, you know, and it's kind of like the Book of Eli type thing.
Yeah.
Then this might be the one.
I love that. I absolutely love that. There's a lot to unpack between these two knives. Okay. So first thing, you said Book of Eli. So if it's a Book of Eli situation, what book are you memorizing?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good question. I actually don't know if I can answer that on a podcast because that's like really deep. Yeah.
Hey, we get deep here, dude. We get deep here.
That's deep. Memorizing a book.
If you guys don't know, Book of Eli, it's Denzel Washington, right?
Yeah.
It's actually kind of a cool, if I remember, it's kind of a cool movie. It's very violent, so if violence not your thing, don't watch it. But basically, it's a very sparse, apocalyptic, dystopian area. I think they're trying to get to Alcatraz.
Yeah.
And Alcatraz basically has become the new the Library of Alexandria. And this character that he's playing has memorized the Bible, like the King. I think the King James version of the Bible. I think they're specific about which version. But anyways, he memorizes the Bible, and so at the end, he literally is laying on a bed as an old man reciting the Bible because it's the last existing copy is in his brain, which is kind of cool. So So you can think about it for a bit if you want.
Yeah, I will answer it before the end of the podcast.
Okay, perfect.
I'll have that one kicking around. Yeah.
And then, so the next one, when it comes to zombie apocalypse, right? I feel like with a zombie apocalypse, it's a bug in, not bug out situation, right? Like you don't want to like be out and about, or as little as possible. Obviously, you got to gather resources. So I've always thought that the best like place to be in, I think maybe in any apocalypse, but definitely a zombie apocalypse, would be the top of a windmill.
Top of a windmill.
Yeah. Because think, you've got a lookout, so you have tons of visibility on what's coming, right? They're hollow on the inside, so you have tons of storage to store stuff. They got stairs all the way to the top, and there's a really good chance that that thing will keep spinning, or at minimum, it has what it needs inside that you could create like a hand crank, or maybe where you could have power still.
Yeah.
So you
100%.
could have some electricity, right?
Yeah.
So you've got distance, and a lot of times they're in river valleys.
Yeah.
Or close, right? Because they're canyons where they're collecting wind. Dude, I think windmill.
And if there's enough windmills, you could build rope bridges between them.
Right, exactly.
And that way you could escape to the other one and cut the bridge.
Exactly.
There you go. I like your.
Yeah. So I feel like windmill's the place to be. Like if I had to pick one place, I think windmill's the place.
I dig it.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. Yeah.
Dude, these are the important questions we're asking.
Very important ones.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
If you can't tell, I've thought a lot about, oh, dude, what if everything just ended and I just had to survive?
I think we all have. Honestly, I don't know if it's a guy thing or what, but it's kind of fun to think about.
Yeah.
In a weird way. Yeah.
I mean, that's the fun thing with Apocalypse Knife, and that's why it's a category here. I said this before, but there really is something so romantic about this. Like, I've got 3 shots left in one knife, and the group's leaving, and I'm gonna hold the line. You know, like I don't know what it is, but I always joke. I'm like, I'm old enough where I'm ready to die in a land war in Europe.
Yeah,
You know
right.
what I mean? Like, my
Biological
genetic
talk
memory is
quick.
like.
Yeah. That's fact.
Yeah, it's
That's
pretty
funny.
good. It's pretty good. Dude, but I mean, back to the LT5, like that knife is, I mean, that is for sure my favorite fixed blade of this year. Well, we're technically in 2025, but 2024.
Right. Fair enough.
Because I picked one up from you recently, right? Dude, and I like, because I've always been a big fan of the Topps Tom Brown tracker, right? Like whatever about like what Tom Brown and anything with Tom Brown, right? Like whatever about that. I actually really like the knife.
Yeah.
And I've used it in a lot of applications where I'm like, wow, this thing's really useful, right? And the way it looks too, I think it's the Tracker 2 or 3 or whichever one's the bigger one. Love that knife. But dude, that LT5, I had the tracker in a pack and I put the LT5 and took the tracker out. Because dude, it's good, man. It's really good.
Well, thank you, man.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So yeah, and then and remind me of the name of the Ken Onion knife again.
The Chance in Hell.
Chance in Hell.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
right.
Yep.
I don't think they make that anymore, but
That's really unfortunate. Maybe this video, if enough of you guys comment,
yeah,
a resurgence of the Chance in Hell. Yeah.
that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, back to Tops, like, dude, if you want a sword machete, Tops has got like 10 to choose from.
Right.
So
Yeah.
There's
a market.
Always a good way to go.
Yep.
That's great. That's absolutely great. Do you have any other, like, I mean, like if you've thought about apocalypse scenarios, right? Like what's like, how would you approach it? Like what's your approach in this situation?
Apocalypse scenario.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to say, food. I think is probably the most critical thing.
Yeah.
I think
yeah.
I had a conversation with my employees about this. I was like, I think food is overlooked because everyone's like, I need water distillation. I need this. It's like, yeah, water's important, but guess what? You can boil water.
Yep.
And that's always the out there, and you can always just go to the river. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not like perfect water, but you can drink out of a river. Fair enough. But yeah, food is like the most critical thing. So I mean, I think aside from dodging zombies or whatever it is out there, right? It's agriculture of some kind. You know what I mean? Like that's the whole game, because you can survive against zombies for a few days, but you're gonna starve. So it's like, how do you get agriculture going again?
No.
It's the foundation of civilization. If you want civilization, you need agriculture.
Exactly. So, well, and even outside the idea of agriculture, like how many of us really know how to even hunt something?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
short term.
Yeah. Like, can you hunt? Can you catch a rabbit? Do you know how to process said rabbit? Right.
Yep.
And like that's the real thing when it comes to those situations. Because there's some real life like ways that we can look at like the concept of apocalypse, right? And it's like, what about like the sun like letting off a huge EMP and knocking out electrical, right? Yeah. And there was a really interesting report that came out, I think it came out early 2000s, late 90s. I don't know the exact date when the report came out. But anyways, or it might have been more recent. But it was the CIA or the FBI in the United States. And they did a report and they're like, yeah, if there was like a mass outage, like a huge EMP, and the way to do it would be the sun, right? Would knock out a bunch of stuff, right? They're like, yeah, I think within like 6 months, it's like 90% of people in the United States gone. Or 70% or something like that. Mm-hmm. Because like we're not connected to our food. So it's like, how do you?
Yeah. I think food. I mean, basically everything else is solvable with like a little MacGyver. Mm-hmm. Food is not solvable with MacGyver. Like you either have storage or you have ability to hunt. I mean.
Yeah, or get your own somehow.
Day one, number one priority. That's really all you have time to think about. And I think watching the show Alone, I don't know if you've watched that, it kind of proves it. No. Yeah. It's like, because they have to actually survive and they're actually starving out there.
Oh, it's like a kind of like a Survivor or like a Naked and Afraid type thing?
It's like that, but it's like the most realistic one where they have to truly be alone, film themselves, and then the last man standing gets the prize. Dude. And every single one of them, it's food. Yeah. It's not water, it's not shelter. The food is the decision maker for the winner.
Well, in that situation, it's not just getting your food. I imagine there's got to be a lot of drama around protecting your food.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you got to like store it, and if you're really out alone, like you're attracting animals by cooking and processing and storing tasty smelling things, right? Yep. Oh yeah, that's interesting. I have to check that out. That sounds really cool.
Definitely watch it. Yeah. That shows what illuminated that to me of like, man, you always think about water and shelter. They talk about those first. It's like if they're first chronologically. Yeah. But if you're as soon as you're talking about a week, a month, a year, it's like food is going to be the ultimate decider.
Well, and like how many people have fasted more than maybe 24 hours in their life? Yeah. Right. How do you react when you're 48 hours in and you haven't had a calorie? Right. Yeah. Like no, I like that, dude. That's actually a great consideration. And that another reason that I love this knife topic is because like I think that, again, going back to this romanticized version of like how things will be and how prepared I'll be, right? It's like, first off, the initial like reality of it is there's just a luck factor. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then if you're lucky, then it's like, what's the reality of it? You know?
Yeah. So I have to say, I've been pondering that book. Yeah. I might memorize some books about agriculture. I don't know what the books are.
Okay, yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's if the world's going to get rebuilt, it's going to be based on the back of agriculture. So
I like that. Yeah. Because think about that, right? If you're in a situation where you don't have access to that type of thing, and it's like, like you know how to grow stuff. Not only do you help yourself and your family, but now you're valuable to more people, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Put you in a leader. You become like a food czar.
Right.
Yep. At the top of your windmill, looking over your fields.
Yep. Bring me your bars of gold for some carrots. Yeah,
I love it.
Right. Yep.
Can't eat gold.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm a big food storage guy myself. Yeah. I try to have 6 to 8 months is what I try for. Right. Yeah.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah. So I'll make it.
Right.
maybe.
Right. If you have the right knife, you will.
If I have the right knife,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Just depends on what type we're in.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's amazing.
How do you plan for all those?
Exactly.
Yeah.
On the note of survival and getting through something, and kind of in line with what your first knife was as well. Next category is multi-tool. So
Multi-tool.
yeah, like as far as a multi-tool, what's your go-to multi-tool and why?
My go-to multi-tool, you're gonna get a trend here. I like the classics.
Yeah.
So is the Leatherman Wave, and this is the Plus.
Yeah.
But the Leatherman Wave in general, you
Yeah.
know, it's came out the 90s.
Yeah.
Just kind of defined the whole class of multi-tool. It's the right size. They use like legit steel and things, and it has like replaceable jaws for the wire cutters. So there's a lot out there that are like, you know, you could bang them around for a while and have them as a backup, but they're not like a long-term use tool. Whereas this, you can tell they've engineered it. Like, no, we want you to use it. And it's not only for emergencies and then you replace it or throw it away. It's like, no, actually in your real life. And so I carry this. My dad, I don't have it here, but I have a little leather hip pouch for it.
Cool.
And
made by your dad, I assume.
Yeah.
then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so cool.
So
I love that. Yeah.
I'll throw that on there.
Yeah.
This Christmas gift from my wife, I believe. This
Oh, okay.
particular one, because I've
Yeah.
been eyeballing them. And
Yeah.
that is the one. It's got a giant scar on it from a wire coming in contact that created a short, which burned it pretty
like
bad.
arced across.
So it literally has a hole in it from an arc. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So that's a good little story.
Were you doing like commercial electrical work or just at the house?
It was at the house. It was something. Yeah, it was a dumb story.
Okay.
Classic. Oversight over which breaker it was.
Yeah, the
or
breaker's off,
something.
but it's not off. Yeah.
So it was one of those stories, but yeah, contacted a couple of wires, arced on it, threw a little spot weld on there. So
Perfect.
that's how I know it's mine.
That's absolutely amazing. Yeah, I think that you nailed it when you were talking about process, materials, and intention with a Leatherman, right? There's just something. There are a lot of great multi-tools out there, right? Like, and there's a lot of companies that make good ones, right? But I just haven't seen another brand stand the test of time, not in how long it's been around, right? But in just how much you can knock those things around.
Yeah.
They have a stellar warranty too. Like that's the other thing. It's
And
like,
the warranty says it all because
Yeah.
it displays what they intend you to do with it.
Yep.
You know, because if they're going to back it up for 25 years or a lifetime or whatever it may be, I mean, you know, they're ready for you to use it that long. So
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I was up in the Portland area because Leatherman, another Portland-based one. I was up in the Portland area and I was trying to contact with Leatherman and we kept missing each other. So I was like, I'm just gonna go. I think it was just like tail end of all that crazy stuff from a few years ago.
Yeah.
So right, like it wasn't just as easy to walk into a building and talk to people, especially not in Portland, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I bumped into some people in the lobby. It was the guys, they're out of Texas, the Tactile guys. I forget the name of the...
Will Hodges?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was him that I bumped into. Anyways,
No way.
yeah. So I bumped into them there, and you know, they're big process guys, right? Like they have tons of machines and they're really about it.
Yeah.
And they were there specifically to check out what Leatherman's doing because Leatherman is just so like engineer based and just like so intentional about what they do.
They posted a video in their shop and they have all these cells with like robots sharpening knives and all these systems, and just to have the price point with that many moving parts, you know, it's a testament to their engineering capacity because they're doing it in the U.S. with that much complexity. It's kind of shocking actually, and yeah, I admire that company. I admire the Wave in particular. So
Yeah.
it's a clear winner for me.
Yeah, no, the Wave's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm a big Surge guy myself.
Yeah, the bigger one.
Yeah, there's just I don't know what it is. There's just something about like, well, and I carried one as a carpenter, right? Not that I was using a Wave or using a Leatherman daily as a carpenter, right? But every once in a while, right? Like if it was on my hip or in my pocket or even in my bags, sometimes it's like, oh, I left my pliers on this side of the job site. Oh, cool, I'll just pull
You're
the
hanging
Leatherman.
from a truss and
Exactly. Yeah. Again, not that it was a primary tool, but man, it came in so handy. And like dropping it in concrete, like I mean, that thing has had no respite. It just keeps coming back for more.
keeps
you know?
sticking.
Yeah, and Tim Leatherman's story is amazing, right? Like, I mean, he came back with this idea. You know, they were traveling overseas. They were having car problems, whatever. And he's like, I don't want to carry 20 tools around. And when he came back, he actually pitched it to like, if you name a company from back in the day, I think this was late 70s, if I remember correctly. You name a company from back in the day, Tim Leatherman pitched this idea to them. And all of them passed. They're like, nope, it's a gimmick, doesn't matter, like whatever. And he's like, fine, I'll do it myself. And here we are.
So we did.
Yeah. I heard at one time that Leatherman is one of the biggest knife companies in the world.
I believe it.
I mean, they make multi-tools, but you know, same idea, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what I've heard. Yeah.
They're impressive.
Yeah. Okay, so I get this a lot on the channel because I like to carry a couple tools on me. You're probably the same, at least in your Jeep. I'm sure you always have tools with you, right? And I hear this a lot about like multi-tool is not a real tool. Just get a real tool, right? And so I'm just interested specifically because you were talking about wires and whatever, right? Do you find yourself grabbing that to do tasks as opposed to like maybe going out to the shed and grabbing something?
So it's the same thing you described. So I like bringing tools for the job, specifically for that job, and try to think it all through. But if I'm leaving, going somewhere, I'm going out in the mountains, I'm getting in the Jeep or whatever, I try to have like my toolkit that I really thought through. But that has a screwdriver and the pliers and all that. And it's like, it's a single redundancy because it's like, oh, I did forget my pliers. It's got pliers. I forgot a Phillips screwdriver. It's got a Phillips. So it's like a universal backup. And because of that, it ends up really kicking in gear. And also, like if I'm laying under a car working and there's one, electrical connector I need to just get undone and I don't want to crawl out from under, go get my pliers. It's like, oh, right there, do it, put it back. So it's accessibility and speed and then just an ultimate backup tool. And that's kind of how I look at it. So it gets a lot of use.
Yeah. No, a redundancy I think is a perfect, that's actually, I've never thought to like tie that, right? But like redundancy is I think a perfect way to describe carrying something like that, right? Is it's just like, oh yeah, like of course I've got my real pliers and screwdrivers, but dude, I don't know if you're like me, but like I'll have a tool bag in my car and maybe I'm working something outside and I know I have a real screwdriver in the car right there. So I grab it and then I forget to put it back.
Yep, exactly.
And it's like, but I have my Leatherman, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I like that. And it doesn't really cost you any weight or time or anything like
Exactly. It's like a second tool set that weighs almost nothing. And granted, it's not as ergonomic as like full-size tools, all that. But like I said, the redundancy factor to just throw it in your pocket, your go bag, your car, whatever. It's pretty nice.
I mean, to be able to buy a little toolbox for, I don't know, what do they go for, $100, $120, whatever, 150, whatever it is. Be able to buy a little tool bag and be able to throw it in a glove box in every car you own, like not a bad deal.
For sure.
Now, dude, I wish you had the sheath because I would love to see it.
Actually, it's got to be around here somewhere. Do you want me to find it right now?
No, that's okay.
All right.
But I mean, on that note, with your dad being a saddle maker, does he make like, I know that specifically on the LT5, he makes the leather loop for the LT5. But like, I mean, obviously growing up, like he probably made a lot of stuff for you guys in the family. What were some of what was that like having somebody who's like basically a leathersmith? Like,
I mean, it was awesome. Took it for granted for sure because now I'm in a metal shop. And when I was in the leather shop growing up, I wanted to work with metal. Now I'm in a metal shop and there's all these applications for leather. That's how it goes.
Of course.
They don't mix super well, the metal and leather.
No, definitely not.
But yeah, no, growing up, all kinds of things. We were, one funny story is we had these like pygmy goats as kids. And we would catch frogs. That was like our thing, my sister and I, all day. And so my dad and he helped us make like a harness for the goat to have a 5-gallon bucket on each side of the goat. And so we'd put like our fish nets in each side of the bucket and we'd lead this little goat out to these like ponds and put, a gallon of water in each one and put all our frogs and snakes and stuff in there and then lead them back.
Dude, that is amazing. I mean, I have heard of pack goats, but that is literally one of the coolest things. Like that is so rad. So,
that's the memorable stuff for me is like the really eccentric stuff that it's like my mom, she's got some nice cabinets in the kitchen and she had my dad do some like filigree leather around the top of the cabinet. So it's like, and outlet covers that are leather with like carving. So it's like stuff that you wouldn't normally think of, because like the belts are obvious, the wallets are obvious.
Of course,
but like
knife sheath. Like
when you have that much leather and that much access to it, like weird things end up being made out of leather, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, so that might be the first ever pygmy goat harness in the world.
Yeah, very much. Yeah,
that's incredible.
Could be. And it was used for just the right application.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Custom made. Yeah. I mean, right, if somebody had hit him up and been like, I want to buy this from you, right? Like the R&D and cost on, I mean, he probably would have had to sell that for like $500 to make it worth his time, right?
And here we are.
That's amazing. Do you guys still have that harness?
I don't know. I'd have to ask. I don't think so. Pygmy goats have been gone a long time.
Yeah, of course. And that's kind of the funny thing, and you probably noticed this with having the shop and everything, is you can make these things or like have these special applications that to anybody else would just be this like prized possession, but you're like, oh yeah, it's like what I do, right? Like, It's like the guy that is a mechanic, right? Like he might have a really cool car and he's proud of it, right? But it's also like, I work on cars all day, like they come and go.
Yeah, engine swap, new head gasket, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Dude, that is amazing. I was working on a big custom project in I think it was in Utah, might have been in Idaho, in Sun Valley, because I spent some time in Sun Valley. Anyways, on a big like staircase, and I was doing the carpentry for it, and they had a leather guy come in. I don't know if he was a saddle maker. He probably was, but anyways, and the banisters were all like wrapped scrolled leather.
Wow.
It was insane. I mean, there was a base to it, of course, right?
Yeah.
But I've never seen anything like that.
That's cool.
That was well before I had a cell phone, so I'll have to show you like the physical picture sometime.
Yeah.
Since you grew up around it, you might appreciate it.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah,
Cool.
Dude, it was amazing it was like braided leather, like the whole banister. It was incredible.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. So like light covers and things like
And
that.
yeah, one of the things my dad always says is we have all this material science technology that's replaced all these organic materials over the years, but they haven't really been able to engineer something like leather. You know what I mean? It's just, you know, if you're in a car interior or something that isn't real leather, it's super obvious. You know what I mean? You just can't. The durability, as well as like the way it weathers and the way it patinas, and like, man, it's hard to beat.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, dude, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of wool as well.
Yeah.
I know there's things like propylene, and there are things out there that can like technically compete with wool, but I feel like, and they're great. Like I have things like that, right? But I just feel like whenever I have wool, especially when I'm wet and it's cold, nothing beats wool for me.
Yeah.
All right, so we just did a quick battery change, but there was something really important, pertinent to that last conversation, that I wanted to make sure that everybody had heard. So while I was changing the batteries, I asked you, I was like, oh yeah, so like what weird stuff did you do with leather, right? So like there were two things specifically that I was like, this is incredible.
Yeah. So one of them was we would always walk around barefoot. That was the thing. I never wore shoes as a kid. And we'd ride our bikes and the pedals would hurt our feet. So we'd take sheepskin, because you use sheepskin under a saddle. And we'd wrap our pedals with sheepskin and tie it on there so that we could pedal around on our bikes on barefoot.
Dude, I love that.
And then also I'd use leather to attach things to other things that leather's not really used for. Like I had a piece of countertop one time that I wanted to build a go-kart out of. Don't ask. It was a piece of countertop that looked like a go-kart to me at the time.
I love that.
And I remember nailing leather to it to hold on the different things, and trying to, put a steering wheel on it when that doesn't make any sense at all, but attaching it with leather. So like a bunch of ring nails. My dad had a big old box of ring nails, which he used for saddles so the nails don't back out. Just little like finished size ring nails and leather. I'd have that box and cutting up scrap leather and nailing stuff. And I always just wanted to work with metal, but it's just such a different, it's a world apart. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, you were saying your dad's kind of craftsman mind. I mean, you guys are both craftsmen, but he's kind of like artistic craftsman maybe, right? Because saddle making, there's a lot of art to that, right? And you're a lot more mechanically craftsman minded, right?
Yeah. He likes organic materials big time. That's one thing, like my mom's side of the family, they're all diesel mechanics. Oh, okay. Every single one.
Yeah.
So I got the bug of being into cars, metal, engines, oil, grease, bolts, nuts, all that stuff. Cool. And my dad comes from like a farmer background, which they only work on that stuff if they have to.
Yep.
It's not a hobby.
It's only when it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the difference there. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, but that's something, I think there's something really important though in that process, right? Like, especially as a young kid, like discovery, success, and failure. I think that it's so important. And probably has a lot to do with where you're sitting right now, right? Literally and figuratively, right? Is that you had this space, right? First off, you had a dad that was engaged in the world in some way, right? And then you had this space where you could just grab a scrap piece of countertop. I mean, your dad probably never even knew what you were doing, right? And you're outside and you're like, how does this work, right?
Yep.
And you had the space and the material to be able to fail, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't even really a failure because you're so young. It was an education, right?
For sure.
Yeah. And I think that's like such an important thing just for us as humans, right? We're like naturally we're curious. I mean, some of us are more curious, some of us are less curious, but like chasing your curiosity, I think is so important, right?
That's for sure.
Yeah.
And they were generous enough one time. I asked for a welder and I wanted one so bad. They got like the cheapest Harbor Freight style. Got it for me for Christmas. Awesome wire feed welder. But then I went around, there's no metal around, right? And so it's like, I've got 2x4s, and so I found like horseshoes.
Yeah.
And I would just weld horseshoes together and like old farm implements, and it's all rusty. I didn't have a wire wheel, so I was just like welding a bunch of random crap together.
Just throwing slag and like, oh yeah, dude.
Yeah, so there was a moment there where I got to play around like that, but
that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's one of the beauties of, not one of the beauties, I think that's one of the things that we lose so much as adults, is that we lose that curiosity, or at least the drive to pursue it, right? And rightfully so, right? Like we got bills, we got things to take care of, we got families, we got whatever, right? We have all these obligations in the world. But I think that it's really important to carve out that time. Do you find, I mean, right, you're making all day,
Yeah.
right? Do you find that you still look for like creative ways to express yourself, like kind of in failure where you're not just producing something, right? Or is that at the shop that you're doing that? When you're
So-
prototyping and you're figuring out new designs?
So I do have to say, like the last couple of years, I felt pretty starved for that because we've been in a phase of such growth with moving into this new shop this year that there's so many things that need buttoned up that aren't particularly on the creative side. You know what I mean? As far as like running airlines, getting machines oriented, there's so much to do that I did get a little starved in this last year for some sort of tinkering project. So you saw the Jeep out there that I bought because I have a Jeep that I love, but it's like it's still under warranty, and I would mess with it, and it's like it's a really modern vehicle that isn't as tinkerable.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it's under warranty, so why would I guess? And so I really got that hunger just building up, and I started to notice that it was like frustrating me at a high level. And so I got this older Jeep, and I just loved, like rear main seal, oil pan. It's like the axle of that sitting, I pulled the front axle out and set it on some sawhorses, and it was the most satisfying thing in a long time because it's like I will lay in bed at night and visualize like suspensions and taking them apart, and that's what really excites me. But like I said, with a new vehicle under warranty, like why take it apart, right?
Yep.
So I'm like, I want to find something that has issues, and I hope it has issues, and it did. And so yeah, if you buy yourself a '90s Jeep, it's gonna have issues.
It's gonna have issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're effectively inviting problems, but more importantly, I think that you're inviting like a place to stretch that curiosity.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I love working on things like that and solving problems and fixing things and cleaning things up and just automotive. I've talked about it before. It's such a big part of my childhood. That was really where the basis of my interest in mechanical things was.
Yeah, learning CAD and going to school for stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And knives are a great parallel to that. And so it sounds weird that knives would be parallel to automotive, but it really is because it's mechanical in the way that it's manufactured. And that's where a lot of people ask me, like, do you forge? Are you into forging? It's like, that's a little more like my dad's speed. You know what I mean? It's like it's not an organic material, but it's more of a free flow. Whereas I like manufacturing and mechanical things. And so it really fits in that same like spot for me as what automotive does. So it's a lot of fun.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And you hit the exact point that I was going to go with is I think that's one big thing about knives and pocket knives and fixed blade pocket knives, whatever it is. Like, okay, we can't all like have a project car. You know what I mean? I've had tons of years in my life where I don't have a motorcycle or car I'm working on, right? But like, I think that's one of the draws of knives is it's something you can just put on your kitchen table, right? With a basic set of tools, but there's on it, especially with a folder, there's so much you can do, right?
Yeah.
Between pulling it apart and tweaking with it and adding scales. It is still that type of curiosity packed into a much more, I think, approachable package for anybody, right?
Yeah, the floor is low.
Yep.
And the ceiling is high.
Yeah.
Whereas with automotive, like the floor is also high. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I love that. The
Yeah.
floor is low, the ceiling is high. I
Yeah.
love that. And I think that's a perfect way, especially when we're talking about modifying and tinkering with pocket knives. I think that's a perfect way to say that. That's
And another way I've approached it too is a phrase I used to use more. I haven't recently, but it's part of the name of our podcast with the Edge and Flow podcast. Is I always used to say that like I always wanted to get to the edge, and I may have described this to you before. Maybe in a previous video. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I've heard. I don't know if we've captured on video, but I think we have talked about this.
Well, the metaphor in my head was always like human discovery is like if you drop a bucket of paint and it splats out. It's like cancer research is like that droplet that went 10 feet away. Whereas like there's different areas where humans haven't invested billions of dollars. And automotive is one of those that's really far away. So it's like to get to the edge in the automotive scene of knowing where the industry's headed and not just absorbing like how to fix things, but like how do you further an industry like that? That's a lot of work. I mean, that's decades, to get to the leading edge of like automotive or cancer research. But knives always felt like we're more of a valley because it's like you can get to the edge where you're starting to understand what the industry, what all the minds are working on and work on it in parallel with them and try to advance the industry like at a younger age faster. And that was exciting to me. So that I think was the main thing that diverted me to knives is that to get to where I'm not just like a total underling in automotive to where I'm actually making decisions at a industry-wide like innovation level it was just too far away for me. I didn't want to, I wasn't patient enough for that basically.
Yeah.
And so that's where like designing knives immediately, I was like, okay, this is where I can get to the edge, you know?
Dude, I
So-
love that. I actually don't know if we've ever talked about that. That's such a stellar way to look at it. And I agree with you, even with some of the paths that I've taken in the knife world, right? Like it's a similar situation. There's a quote, I can't remember who it is, but they're talking about discovery, and they're talking about, right, getting to the edge without saying it as well as you said it. And it's something along something, and it's like specializations for bugs.
Right,
And so-
right,
right. Like,
right.
and it is, when you look at the far reaches of like cancer research or even the automotive industry,
Yeah.
right? You have to be so specialized, right? It's
Yeah.
like, all I am is like a transmission guy who works on third gear or whatever, right?
yeah,
And it's like, that's
exactly.
where you live, right?
Yep, yep.
But yeah, I really love that concept of like, yeah, you something like the knife world, right? And even as far as knives go, I mean, maybe one day we'll have like lightsabers in our pockets, right? And it's like, okay, that's pretty advanced, right?
Yeah.
But like, the tool hasn't changed that much since we were chipping flint and putting antlers on the end of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it really hasn't. So to get to those edges, and then, I mean, things like the LT5, there's so much in that process, right? That's at the edge of what we're doing in the knife world and how we're doing it.
Yeah, and that brings up the point of like kind of the pivot I made is in the beginning I thought getting to the edge meant the design of the knife itself being revolutionary, but I started to realize that like the process of how they're made is really where like the meat is of this for me. And so it's like getting to the edge of the processes that people are using and like pushing the envelope on the manufacturing side. So a customer may not see that other than the fact that they may be like, wow, that's a good price point given these features, or that's a good feature. How did they accomplish that? Like the customer's not necessarily directly engaged with what I'm talking about, but if you're exposed to the manufacturing and you understand what the industry's problems are and you find solves for those, that feels really, really good. And I love talking with other manufacturing people because the knife industry is super interesting in that there's very few secrets.
Yep.
Most people share everything.
Yep.
Especially here in Boise, you can go visit Tim over at Chris Reeve Knives. You can go visit any manufacturer really in town, and people are just like, this is how we do this. Look, this is the end mill we use. This is the part number. This is the feeds and speeds. Like, and it's all kind of this interchange. And there's a heat treater in the valley who hardens all of our knives here. And they do other heat treat for other industries. And he said to me the other day, he's like, yeah, the knife industry is super strange how all you guys just share everything. He's like, because all our other customers tell us not to tell anyone else what we're doing. Whereas in the knife industry, they're all like, it's like the heat treat they're developing, everyone is using together. It's kind of like a community effort. And so I love that. And that's like that feeling of being on the edge, that it's like you're kind of helping a buddy out. You know what I mean? You're trying to solve problems. So it's a great feeling.
Yeah, and I think that's, we talk about, all of us, we talk about often how great the knife community is, and I think that it really starts there, right? Like it starts at that level, right? Like, and like there's little secrets here or there, whatever, right? But like it starts at that level that like the companies are also willing, and the makers are willing to have conversations with each other on different levels,
Yeah.
but way more than any other industry that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so taking those ideas, I'm actually really interested how what we just talked about might wrap into this next knife that we're going to take a look at, and that's your most important knife, or knives. Like when I sent you over the list, I was just like, however you interpret these things,
Yeah.
right? So what did you pick for most important?
The most important knife in my career to this point is probably this knife, and that is the Koenig Zenata. So this is one of those early models I was talking about, and this is where the evolution of like getting to the edge kind of came about. I was also a big fan of guns, still am, and I had a 1911 at the time, and just a classic old school pistol, 100-year-old design. And you can take it apart without a screwdriver or a tool. It's all by hand.
Yeah.
And it's just springs and buttons and stuff, and it all comes apart. And I couldn't believe that when I got that firearm. I was like, how do they do that? That's 100 years old. And I'm like, why is there not a knife that's like that? They all require a Torx driver, some kind of, everything's pressed together and you have to like pry it apart. You know what I mean? Why isn't it that you can just take it apart? And so this knife was my attempt to do that, was to basically, I don't know that it's the first of its kind per se, but I just didn't see it anywhere else, and I thought, let's try to do it. And so this knife doesn't have a single screw on it. I mean, zero. And this thing can be taken apart literally just in the palm of your hand. You can just pop. It's basically a second lock arm in the back, and the whole thing just dovetails apart. and I won't take it all the way apart because I'm probably going to drop it trying to hold it
Right,
up
yeah,
like
yeah,
this.
'cause
But
we're not at a table.
but yeah, it's 90% taken apart. If I swing that all the way, it just falls apart in my hands. And so that was important because this knife really paved the way in a lot of ways for me to feel like I could get to the edge and that this industry was a good home for me. And people liked this knife enough that it helped begin my career, at a young age. And my logo for my knives, you'll see it on all the stuff we make, is a dovetail. And that's from this knife.
Oh,
Because
I never realized
I
the connection.
yeah, I designed that logo when I designed this knife. And it also, my name, Schwarz, the S and the Z are a dovetail. So it's like the name itself is a dovetail. And so it was kind of just a play on all that. So yeah.
Dude, that's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. Now, because you started designing before you started making, right? There's about a 3-year gap between the two. So where was this, like, in that design? Was this the knife that you're like, oh, I want to start making stuff? Or was just this the first knife that you're like, oh, I'm finding the edge and I'm adding, right?
So the Zenata was the second knife that I designed that came to market.
Okay.
It was the first knife I designed that was my design, like that I was the one that conceived, like from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So it was paralleling the original design. And so this was still, I was in college dorm at the time. So it's almost forgotten history at this point until I pull the knife out and look at it. But yeah, the very, very beginning, I mean, in the first few months, that was when that sort of twisting mechanism came about. And so, yeah, it's the origin, it's the beginning.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And what, I mean, so you've got this inspiration from something in the world, right? Like that, I mean, like what's the saying? Won 2 world wars. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
The 1911, right? Like you've got this inspiration, but like, I mean, the whole thing, like the dovetail, the concept of breaking it apart, like, I mean, what was that like? Like, what was it? Was it a eureka moment? Was it you were working on something in school that inspired you, or?
So it was very difficult, to be honest, to get it to work. The concept took months and months because there's various problems with that, as you'd imagine.
I can't even, like in my head, I can't even think about how you would start approaching that.
Yeah, and there's like 2 main sticking points that I just was stuck on for a very long time, and there wasn't like the eureka moment where the whole design was in my head. It was coming at it from 100 different angles and all the sketches and stuff until finally there was like the final question was answered, which was, how do you get a pocket clip on it? That one doesn't have the pocket clip on it, but it's captured on the knife where the clip slides in between and then it's locked in. And then also the pivot and stop pin, when you twist that knife, have a weird situation where they no longer align. So getting the geometry where it's all gonna lock up when it's locked in and it's not floating around in there was part of it. So there's like some clocking in there. So that was what took the longest. And so it really was kind of a grind. And then eventually kind of made it work, and we 3D printed it. This was back when 3D printing was not like buy it on Amazon for $200.
I was just about to say, did you have access to 3D printer through the school?
So
because like nobody had 3D printers back then.
So Boise State, where I was going to school, they had a 3D printing lab, and they had large budget, so it was like really fancy.
Yeah.
And it was like the resin style, which back then like super hard to get.
I was gonna
really
say
rare.
like $30,000 or something crazy, whatever.
A lot more, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they would charge you to have them prototype like anything you want, because it was also training for the people in the lab there.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
And so we had them print it, and I was like, holy crap, this thing actually works. And so we took that 3D print to Blade Show in Atlanta, and that was where people started to notice it, and then took an actual functioning one to SHOT Show, and that's the career snowball started to turn, and that's when I dropped out of school and went full time with knives. So
cool.
Yeah,
cool.
That's why it's so important. It's like it was the leverage that like pried me away from automotive and going the mechanical engineering route and going knives.
Yeah, going with knives.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what it takes, right? Like I've had multiple moments in my life. We were talking about this before we started shooting, but I think a lot of people think that I'm a very like spontaneous person, and I can be, right? Like if it's like, oh hey dude, you want to like drive across the country tonight? Sure, let's go. You know what I mean? Like I can be. But then things like that, right? Like career path or like things that could affect my family or things that could affect people around me, I'm like probably over calculated about it, right?
Right.
And so sometimes those moments where you get that extra leverage, it's like the thing that you need to be like, oh, this is a path. This actually is where I can head, right?
Yeah.
And it's believing in yourself, right? Like it's believing in that moment and being like, okay, cool, like I'm walking down that path.
Yeah.
I guess for you, like, how did you identify that? Because we were talking, you're similar to me. You're like pretty over analytical on certain things.
Yeah.
So what was it? Was it a paycheck? Was it recognition? Like, what was the thing that you were like, oh, like that's a real path? Other than obviously the like amazing design, but like the thing, right?
Yeah. So the feeling I remember having is that I really wanted to start a business. I saw myself as a business owner, and that's where that was a little bit at odds with the automotive thing, because you can get into like automotive accessories, but I think I had some like internal turmoil over like what does that mean to be an entrepreneur in automotive? Unless you're Elon Musk, there's not a lot of track record. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think it was when I was in business. I remember telling my parents, I was like, there was a point my freshman year where I was like, I think if I graduate, I'll consider it a failure because I'm setting that as my deadline to start a business.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm like, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get good grades. I'm not going to, flunk out. But I'm like, I'm giving myself 4 years to start a business. And because I know that if I get the mechanical engineering degree, that's probably what I'll be doing. You know what I mean?
So you have a real good, again, leverage. You have a real good reason to be on a track.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so as soon as that paycheck comes in, the first ME job, I'm probably going to like that a lot. And it's like, so I kind of set a goal of like, where is the business opportunity? And so I was kind of looking, and knives came to me through Koenig, and it all of a sudden it all clicked, you know what I mean? And it answered the questions for me. And I really, the last semester that I was still in school, I had planned, I was like, this is the last semester at the beginning, but I was like, I need to have all these things, and I got my ducks in a row, and I was like, I will be quitting after this semester. So I finished it, and I was gone. So it was an exciting time for me. I mean, there's low risk at that time, and that was part of the fun. Was that, I mean, I'm 19 years old. What can go wrong? You know what I mean? It's whatever.
Right.
But,
like you weren't even married yet, right? Like.
Oh no. Yeah.
I think that's something that's really important there too. Is people can look, and the reason I ask this question is I think that people can look at these things, right? Where whether it's at the level that you're at, right? Like with an amazing business, and you're in this big shop, right? And you're like, I quit school and I did knives, right? And sometimes that's all they see, right? But like you had a plan, you had intention, right? You're like, I think I'm going to be a business owner, and here's the track that I'm on, and I'm not going to give up on this track, but I'm seeing some realities in this track. So you were open to accepting something else, right? And it was that openness, right? And that believing in yourself and kind of knowing yourself well enough to be able to take those steps, right? I love that. I love to hear that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and that kind of led me down the path of, initially I'm like, I'm not going to start a knife company, I'm just going to be a designer. So I did that for quite a number of years and really had a great time, really enjoyed it. But that itch for, like I said, the process is the product, that connection to the manufacturing side really started to call me. And it's an amazing decision. I'm so happy I did it, which is to start buying machines and start manufacturing. Not just because of like a business standpoint, but from the standpoint of when I'm standing in front of a machine and I'm thinking about how that knife is made, it feels even better to me than designing a knife. And that says a lot because I really enjoyed just purely being a designer. But now it's like solving mechanical and engineering problems in manufacturing is really my favorite thing to do.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Thanks.
From sheepskin pedals to making knives, dude.
Yep.
Solving problems.
Finally got to work with metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So, I mean, kind of on that note, is there any suggestion or any advice that you would give people who are interested in getting into the knife industry, who are interested in walking the same path or a similar path to what you've laid out, based around your most important knife?
Yeah, I'd say two things. One is you got to show your face. Networking it's a trope, but it's like if you're not showing your face, it doesn't really matter how good a work you do because human interaction is the foundation for all things.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
The knife world is a tight-knit community.
Yeah.
And it is definitely not just who you know.
Yeah.
But knowing people is essential, is what I found as well.
Yeah. Knowing people and just letting people understand you at a base level, like kind of what we're doing right now, having conversations like this. It's like if you're only an Instagram account or an email address, it's very difficult. I mean, I've just recommended that to so many people because the big breakaway moments in my career were at like SHOT Show and Blade Show. It was like, that was where the huge steps happened. And then it felt like there were months of just like silence.
Yeah.
Where I'm like not sure if my career is actually going anywhere.
Yeah.
And then it's like you go to a show and you talk to people and you're like, no, there's traction here. And it's that human interaction. So just put a high price on spending time and going to shows, showing up, go visit knife maker shops in your area. If you're in a town for some reason, Google what knife makers are there. Go talk to them. You know what I mean? Show your face and be present and, you know, listen, learn. But on the other hand, also, I'd be weary about following other makers when you come in, because it's like, it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong. It's that we live in an industry that's changing, and every industry is changing these days. We talked about AI and these computer models recently. It's like what worked in the 90s didn't work in the 2000s. Yep. What worked in the 2000s didn't work in the 2010s. And that train goes all the way back. And it's like, so people that have built successful careers and design careers, manufacturing careers, you can't really count on their model as like the future. And it doesn't mean they're not going to have a sustainable future. It just means to start a new company, you may have to figure it out for yourself in some ways. And that's where we were having a conversation of like trusting your instincts. And it's like when you see a problem, when you see the winds of change, and then there's like makers that are telling you that that's not how this industry works. We make knives this way. It's always been this way. Be careful about that. Because one thing that my dad's actually said to me is like 10 minutes of bad advice can cost you 10 years of your career.
Yep.
And it's like, just be careful about, you know, falling into the trap of groupthink. It's like, and that's the case with everything.
Everything.
You know, that's not just knives.
Yeah, I mean, that's just life advice, right?
Yeah.
Like, Charles Bukowski, he was like a beat author and poet back in like the 60s and 70s. Not a very great human being. But he has a quote I really like, and he says, "The crowd is a gathering place of weakness." And I think that that's really interesting, and right? Like you can't always, you know, like you see these aspirational things, and it's like, you know, all the sunflowers are facing towards the sun and the one's not, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, be different or whatever. And it's like, no, that sunflower's gonna die because it's not facing, it's broken, right?
Yeah,
Like so you have to take that with a measure,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think that's absolutely stellar way to look at it. And on that note, what is it like? Do you see any winds of change right now? Do you see what's like one thing that you see right now?
I think it's happening universally, but the advent of direct customer manufacturing is pretty hot. And take my word with a grain of salt because it's worked for me.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm one of the old heads now, and it's like if you're coming in, also be having your finger in the air because listening to the people around you only gets you to where their level of success was, but they started in a different era than you. So that's what I feel though, is that the direct to customer, because of the ability to market directly, like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I'm able to talk to customers and you're able to, you know, facilitate that, which I really appreciate. This is such a new thing.
Yeah.
And it's weird that this affects the way that products are manufactured, but it does, because if I can talk directly to a customer, that means my price point and the way I make knives and who I'm making them for has to account for that. And so I'm seeing that a lot where it's like, if you're situated in a way that you're a few steps removed from a customer, and then that gets more complicated, it's like it's hard to adjust, but the direct to customer future seems likely.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go too far into that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Yeah, and I love how you tempered it, right? Because like you said, like, I mean, you've been doing this a decade, right? Yeah. Like that's long enough that you have your own places you're entrenched. You have your own places that you're like, well, this is how it worked, and this is working now, and right? Like, so following your own advice, that's great.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Now, you make a lot of fixed blades. You are a fixed blade maker. Mm-hmm. You are a maker of things that are fixed.
Yes.
And so I'm really interested in this last category, which is kind of two fixed blades that personify your feelings about fixed blades. Okay. Right? Like, like how they like intersect. And we kind of looked at two with the Apocalypse knife, so we know where you stand on the Apocalypse.
Yep.
But what two did you choose to kind of show that off?
So I almost hate to say it.
Oh, this got real interesting real quick. I'm excited for this.
So much in alignment with like the Swiss Army story, you have a company called Morkaniv.
Yep.
And these knives, I mean, for what they are, the value, and I'm a big fan of like understanding the point of diminishing returns really well, because you can make something that's better than anything else. But, you know, the classic story, it's like that last 10% costs 3 times as much.
Yep.
And so it's like, this is such a masterclass in finding the sweet spot on the point of diminishing returns of like, no, it's a good knife, but this thing's like what? $20, $18, like $15?
$20 to $40?
Yeah. And it's like, how is it that it's not trash and it's $20? You know what I mean? So it's a masterclass in understanding where the value matters. You know what I mean? Because you know, it's just an injection molded sheath, an injection molded hard handle, but they did just enough spending on the blade steel side and on the grind and sharpening. So they're like, we're not going to cut corners where it matters the most, but we're going to keep everything as cheap as possible. And it's not that this is the only way to make a knife. It's just that it's a masterclass in understanding where to put the dollars.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the dollars get put in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
And so,
and I would agree with you on that. That is, oh man, that's such great insight. Okay, so I got to see the other one, right? The cross point here. But yeah, like, and then I want to dissect these two.
Yep. And so, got to bring in the Overland.
Oh yeah.
Kind of our flagship.
Just a great knife.
So, and you're asking like kind of a philosophical question a little bit about fixed blades and how I think about them, right? And when it comes to the Overland, you can notice my broken tip.
Oh yeah, love it.
Because I test my stuff, you know. But I like approaching fixed blades from a standpoint of simplicity and pretty direct functionality, because generally someone that wants a fixed blade, they're choosing it over a folder, so that almost puts them in a certain category where they really care about function a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think that this was a blend of a kitchen knife is the most used knife in the world.
Yep.
Like bar none.
But yeah, you want to talk about the most sold knife in the world? Kitchen knife times 100 million.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, it's the segment that almost our whole industry ignores in most ways.
Yep.
But it's the biggest one.
Yep.
And it's like, it's where you can intuitively, like Ken Onion once said to me, like the CRKT M16, he's like, it looks like a steak knife. And he's like, people want to pick up the thing that they're most familiar with. It looks exactly like a steak knife that you've seen since you were a kid.
Yeah.
And so this is a little bit like that in that it's a kitchen knife blended into an outdoor knife, because the intuitive like ergonomics of a kitchen knife are kind of like ingrained in, like we were saying, my kids, she's cutting olives at 5 years old.
Yeah,
like
5 years old.
She's gonna have more
already
experience
using a kitchen knife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like finding the human touch point to make it not only truly functional, which is important, but also answer the question of like, when someone looks at something, there's something other than its actual functionality that makes them want to grab it. And it's what they know, it's what they're comfortable with. And so having like the kitchen knife DNA in an outdoor knife, it's more of like a study of human interest than it is about designing knives, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I try to answer people's internal questions with a knife. I know that's a little out there.
No, it's not out there at all. I think it perfectly captures that, right? And like the Mora being here, I think is so interesting, but especially like, I mean, knowing you, right? But then also like just from this conversation, the Mora makes so much sense, right? Like the Mora is very mechanical. Like the Mora is very like, this is the thing, this is what it does, and this is why it works, right?
Yep.
And it's process, right? Like there's a process to this, right? The injection molding, the choice for the ergonomics, the choice for the grind and the blade steel. And like you said, they put just enough in on the blade steel and the grind that it's like, yeah, you can't deny that the Mora is a stellar fixed blade, right? Yeah. And then with the Overland, right? With the Overland, I feel like that's where you get the edge, right? Like the Overland is like a Mora to the edge, right? Like
and with our like MagnaCut knives, which is the Overland and the Confidant and whatnot, as opposed to the LT5, which is A2 tool steel. On the MagnaCut knives, I was kind of looking at that point of diminishing return situation of like, where's the stopping point where, yes, it's super premium, but we haven't broke over the hill to where we're doing aesthetic costs. And so we want aesthetics to be right, but I don't want to start spending money that only gains aesthetic and doesn't gain functionality. And so we're using basically the most expensive steel you can buy because I really like MagnaCut. And
MagnaCut's a great steel.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if you're spending more than that, you're getting into like Damascus and stuff, which you're no longer spending money on true functionality. You're starting to get, I'm not dissing that.
No.
I'm just saying that for our brand, like we wanted to hit like the rev limiter on functionality and like that point on the curve of that diminishing value. And so it's like, we're trying to make the best knife we can before we're breaking into just exciting and different as opposed to more functional.
Right.
And then so the LT5 being A2 tool steel is like taking a little bit of inspiration from something like a Mora knife, where it's like you can stop lower on that curve and have a lower price point as long as you're spending that lower price point money on the right things, instead of like if that knife had MagnaCut but we had to cut a bunch of other corners so that it had MagnaCut, that happens sometimes. It's like
Yeah.
the knife is only sold by its steel or whatever. It's like, well, why are the ergonomics no good?
Yep.
Why is the sheath no good? You know what I mean? It's like you can't cut the wrong corners, you
Yeah.
know, if you're going to stop early on that curve.
Well, and yeah, I mean the LT5 has so much of that built into it as well, right? Like we've talked about it, and I've got one, and I've been working on a video. I called you like a while ago, and I was before we even knew we were doing this. I was like, hey, dude, like give me the breakdown on this because I want to make a video about this. And as you were talking me through the process of the LTI5 specifically, right? It was these very intentional. I mean everything, like the width of the handle, and like things like, oh, I want a big fixed blade that I think it was like sub 200 was what you're shooting for, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
where you landed, right?
Yeah.
I want this big fixed blade sub 200, but usually, you know, USA made, right materials, like that's hard to do, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was funny because in the pursuit of a material, right, like kind of that rev limiter of where you were trying to reach, you also discovered these other really interesting things, almost by mistake, like by using the handle material you used and by using an accidental order on Kydex that you had ordered, right?
Yeah.
The steel standoff because you were experimenting. Like I think there's so much about that that's like, here's the value, here's what the tool's used for, and then exploring those realities to like come up with something amazing, you know?
And something I've been really playing around with, another like little philosophical sidestep, but in business, I think I've had success trying to try the easy way first.
Okay.
Because everyone's like, the common trope is like, don't take the easy way, you know, push, find the more complex way, find the better way, like dig deeper. But the only problem with that is that like, oftentimes if you try the easy way first, there's actually some rewards there that you would have never known about, you know, because if you're deterring from the easy way, it feels like you're doing the right thing, and that's natural to a lot of humans. Like, I'm starting a company, I'm only the best, right? And it's like, but doing the easy way first has worked out like more often than not. And so there's a lot of times you try the easy way and you immediately like, well, that sucks. Like the easy way is the worst way, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to find a slightly harder way and then try that. And so it's like when I go to approach something in manufacturing, I'm like, what's the easiest possible way to do it? I'm going to do it that way unless I can't.
Right.
Try that first and then only go incrementally harder. And then there's a few times where you get, it's hard no matter how you do it.
Yeah.
But at least you know you tried all the easiest ways. And so the LT5 was a little demonstration in that. I was like, okay, I sat at the drawing board. I'm like, what would be the easiest way to manufacture a knife? And like, well, A2 tool steel is a precision ground tool steel from the factory. So when you buy A2, it's pretty much always precision ground.
Yeah.
And so everyone that makes and stocks A2 is doing precision grinding, whereas all your other steels, like your MagnaCuts and things, you can't really get at precision ground very easily or at scale.
Yeah.
But the infrastructure for all these tool and die makers that are using A2, it's already there. So I was like, we could get it precision, we could get it fast, we could get it cheap. I'm like, the A2 is very tempting, but I have to make sure it's good, right? And so we tested it, and it's stunning with the right heat treat. And so it's like, we could have just overlooked it because it's not a modern super steel. But it's like the testing proved to us that the easy way actually works really good. And it's cheaper, and we reflect that in the price point. So it's not like pulling the wool over people's eyes. It's like, no, we want to give value to the customer, you know what I mean, by having a sub $200 knife that's that big. So I design knives in a weird way. It's like the manufacturing process is the design, and then the knife itself is just like the assembly of the larger design. That's where I have the process as the product.
I was about to say, I know a guy who says process is product.
So I'll usually go about that. I'll design how it would be made first, because I'm like, this sucks. I hate this part. If you took it out and did it easier, what do you have? And I'm like, what knife is that? And then that's the LT5. And so it's like, it's like, what would the easy way be? And it sounds backwards. It almost sounds kind of dirty to be like, that's the easy way to do it. But it's like, if you do it right, it's easy and it's a good knife.
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing is if you do it right? Because there's an easy way to do something where you're like, oh yeah, we're just going to stamp these out. There's no heat treat. We're going to put an edge on it, slap some scales on it, and look, oh, it's a knife, right? And we'll charge what we charge, right? But there's the easy way in that you've got this objective, right? And then you're narrowing that down to, okay, cool, like sub 200. Okay, there's my box that I'm going to put everything in, my objective, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're like, okay, cool, like, oh, this is precision ground. A2 is really great, actually. And you even learned some stuff on the heat treat where you were able to get more out of the A2 because you were playing, right? So even though it was easy in that like these functions were already in place for you to do it, there was still a lot of work and R&D and thought process to get it to that point, right? Like, because you put it, you framed it correctly, right? Like it was a low floor, high ceiling situation, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing I think when you start the easy way is you're starting with a low floor, and that's the great thing is like the ceiling's always, you can get as fancy and complicated as you want, right? The ceiling's the limit, right? Like the sky is the limit, right? Like, so yeah, I love to see that worked into the process.
And that's, well, just to circle back to this real quick, it's like, to make this for $25 or whatever it is, every single step has to be easy, or else there's no way.
There's no way.
There's no way.
Right, because with a lot of times you're paying for complication, right?
Yeah,
like a lot of times, if it's not material, you're paying for complication.
Yeah, and it could just be not in the actual product, but complication in how it's made, right? And so it's like, this is such a masterclass in doing it the easy way and it not sucking.
Yep.
You know what I mean? That's the ultimate test of manufacturing is, can it be easy and not suck? If it's easy and it's good, that's how you win.
Yeah, what is the author who wrote, there's a very famous French book. It translates to The Little Prince. I won't speak French here because I'm not good enough. But it translates to The Little Prince. You probably heard of it. It's also popular in the United States. But the guy who wrote that book was also a pilot. And he has a quote, and he says, "The airplane's not finished when you've added as much as you can to the airplane. The airplane's finished when you've taken away as much as you can from the airplane."
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And what is it? Is it Senna, the Formula One driver, who said, like, simplify and add lightness?
Yep.
It's like, add lightness. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Simplify and add sharpness.
Yeah.
Maybe we translate that for the knife world.
Yeah, right.
All right, so the reason that I asked the two fixed blade question is because I feel like there's so much you can learn about a person by like using the two fixed blades as a crosshair, right? To identify them, right? So like I see the Mora dude, like the second you pulled that out, I was like, oh my gosh, like everything we've talked about this whole time, the Mora just hits so many of these, right?
Yeah.
So we've got process, we've got simplicity, we've got, very mechanical, right? The Mora's very mechanical, right? How would you personify the Overland in that? What's that second crosshair where you would say with the Overland captures?
I think it's a demonstration that, like I said, the sweet spot on that curve of, I don't know, like I said, diminishing returns or whatever.
Yeah.
It's wider than some people would like to admit. It's like there's some makers that get really focused on narrow sections of that.
Yeah.
But it's like, I always think to myself, it's, if there's a Boy Scout looking to buy a knife and, they have their certain budget, they have their birthday money, whatever, it's like, they're not going to buy an Overland. So that's why I like the Mora. It's like, for what it is, it's a masterclass. And then my goal with the Overland is like to show that on the other side of that spectrum, like, it's our knife. I'd love to think it's a masterclass. I hope it is. It's what we want to see at that price point with the maximum amount of functionality driven into that product. And it's like, it can be done along that chain for a different set of customers, right? So they're the same knife, but on a different end of the spectrum, I guess.
I like that.
Different place on the curve.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So the Mora captures, I think the way to look at that then is the Mora captures so much of your philosophy in process, right? Mm-hmm. And then the Overland is your execution of that.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Mm-hmm. Rad. Dude, well, right on. This has been just such a fun conversation. I hope you've been enjoying it.
Yeah, really fun. I'm looking forward to the burger as well.
Oh yeah, no, we're definitely gonna get burgers. We're definitely yeah. We can't let you guys down. We're not gonna forget the burgers.
Yep.
Is there anything else? Like hopefully we've covered a good breadth and depth here of like how you feel about knives, how you feel about your process in knives. Is there anything that we've missed that you feel like is important, that you feel like captures what you're doing or captures your feelings about this awesome world that we get to be a part of?
Man, we really hit a lot of different directions, a lot for a short amount of time.
We did.
We've covered a lot of ground, so I'm kind of thinking about it. But trust your gut. I mean, it's something we already talked about, but it's like, it's really been resonating for me in my life is just, it feels good to listen to yourself, not overthink things, but listen to the way your body reacts to situations. In business, it's a very instinctual situation, and just follow the wind, man. Wherever it feels right, go that way.
I love it. Well, guys, thanks so much for following along. This has been an absolute blast for us, so we hope that you've enjoyed it as well. Thanks again, TJ, for being here. This has been a good one, and there are going to be more of these. So I'm actually on the road right now. I'm headed actually to Lucas Burnley's place. Yeah. So I'm going from Idaho to Oregon. I'm going to pop down to Oregon, in Southern Oregon. I'm going to talk with WorkSharp as well. They've got a guy there that you guys are definitely going to want to hear from. Not about sharpeners, about knives. It's going to be amazing. And yeah, if you like this thing, make sure to like it. Make sure to leave a comment. And let me know who else you'd love to see on this. But first, we're going to get some burgers and fries. All right, TJ, where are we at, man?
We're at the Double Diamond in New Plymouth, Idaho. They have an indoor goat roping arena. We got a little event tonight, so yeah, pretty cool.
So you like, do people come in to rope it, or is this like spectator sport?
It's a spectator sport. Yeah,
that's amazing.
They're pretty pro. Yeah, yeah.
There we go, right in the bar.
All right, burgers and fries, just like we promised. How's yours?
Delicious.
Dude, this is actually stellar burger, so if you're ever here, hit it up. Thanks for watching, guys.